MEAC play starts this week, and I have two games that I'm focused on for the rest of the season. Oh, yeah, it's Locked On HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics. Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make it Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com to get started. And if you put down your first $5 bet, you get $200 back in bonus bets. Just go to FanDuel.com to make every moment more. We'll wrap up today's episode with a look at Tennessee State and their ability to close out the season. That's something I think they need to and have to improve on as they go through the rest of 2024. In segment 2, we'll take a look at the HBCU rankings and the two games that shifted those rankings the most over the previous weekend. Now, I want to kick it off with the MEAC because this is the first real week of MEAC play. You had Norfolk State versus North Carolina Central. Well, that was a one-off. It wasn't a hotly contested matchup. It really didn't feel like MEAC play was underway because you still had weeks before everybody was in conference. Now everybody is in conference play. All 6 teams are playing another one of their conference opponents. So I want to look at it because there's 2 games for the remainder of the season in MEAC play that I have my eyes on. And I know you have week after week after week, and it's consistent games, but there's 2 in particular that I have my eyes on, and it's North Carolina Central versus South Carolina State, and then North Carolina Central versus Howard. Now, that being said, when I say I'm looking forward to, I mean anticipating. I mean sitting on the edge of my seat. I mean I can't wait. I mean I know October 31st, Thursday, Halloween, you have North Carolina Central versus South Carolina State. That's what I mean when I say anticipating. Yes, even this week has some good matchups. They have some matchups that I'm interested in watching, but there's none that have me on the edge of my seat like I cannot wait until this happens. That honor belongs to these 2 games, and that's Central versus Howard and then Central versus South Carolina State. I'll start with the Central versus Howard game, right? First off, you see the commonality between the 2 games is the Eagles. I've said it before, I'll say it again. North Carolina Central is the best team in Black college football. The rankings do kind of suggest that. We'll get into that in segment 2, but I've said this for a while. North Carolina Central is the best team in Black college football. And last time I checked, the entirety of the MEAC is involved in Black college football, which would then in turn mean that North Carolina Central is the best team in the MEAC. I think there's 2 games that are going to test that, though. There's 2 games that are going to test that, and that is the Howard game, and that is the South Carolina State game. I'll start with the Howard one, like I said, because I think that one's a little bit harder to grasp. I think that's the one that people may challenge me. Like, you really looking forward to Central versus Howard with the way that Howard's looking this year? Fair. I'll say that's fair. But the other thing about it is I look at Central versus Howard as a rivalry game. When you look at how things have transpired over the last 2 years, right? North Carolina Central whipped Howard in 2022. Whipped Howard. And then head coach Larry Scott came out and said they think that they should have a MEAC championship game, to which head coach Trey Oliver said, what we need it for? We just beat you by 40. The next year, Howard comes back and they beat North Carolina Central by 40. And no, I do not think that was a coincidence. They could have took their foot off the gas, but they wanted to beat them by 40 points, and that's what they did. These have been the 2 best teams in the conference over the last 2 years. Is that true this year? I don't know. But I do know that there's some tension. The reason I mention those comments is that those head coaches are still there. The reason I mention these comments is it shows it goes deeper than just talent versus talent. There is bad blood. There is tension. I don't want to say bad blood, but there is tension. And in rivalry games, typically we throw the record out of the window. We throw who you are out of the window, and we look at the fact that we know I'm going to get your best and you're going to get my best. And that's how I look at this. What is the best that Howard has to offer? I don't know. I don't know. But I do think that rivalry games are ones that you can't necessarily sit here and tell me about, well, this is a 1-7 team versus a 6-3 team. Like, I don't think you can necessarily do that in these type of matchups. So because of it, I'm looking forward to North Carolina Central versus Howard. I really am. I think it's going to be a hotly contested matchup. I think it's a game that North Carolina Central can lose because of the tension around it, not necessarily looking at the teams. Looking at the teams is clear cut. But if I wanted to just look at the teams, I wouldn't have said it was 2 games. I would have said it was 1 game, because now I'm looking at North Carolina Central versus South Carolina State. And South Carolina State, that's a talent versus talent. That's a game where I'm like, ooh, these may be the top 2 teams. This may be what North Carolina Central and Howard was for the previous 2 years, right? Like, this is what it feels like, because South Carolina State feels like the up-and-coming game or the up-and-coming team in this conference. I know I predicted that it would be Morgan State, but it's not. South Carolina State, as we walk into MEAC play, is the up-and-coming team. They are the hot team. Chennis Berry and what he's been able to do in his first year at South Carolina State is extremely remarkable. You look at the fact that he brought a lot of his guys over from Benedict College. To bring that many guys from the D2 ranks to the FCS ranks and to still perform as well as they are, I don't think that that can be stated enough, because that says volumes. That speaks volumes about the ability to coach. That speaks volumes about the ability to recruit. That speaks volumes about the culture that you're already building, and to build that culture to this height in year 1. Oh my gosh, the future is scary, but the present is scary as well. So I'm looking at North Carolina Central versus South Carolina State. I'm building it up like it's the game of the week already. That game being on Thursday, I have to think about how we're going to tweak our game of the week. I don't necessarily know how we're going to do it. I don't know, but I feel like, without looking at the SWAC, I just feel like that has to be our game of the week. I just feel like it has to be. I don't think there's going to be many games better than that. But then again, I have to wait through the first week of action, because North Carolina Central could get upset by Morgan State. South Carolina State could lose to Delaware State, right? Yeah, they're playing Delaware State. Like that could happen. And now all of a sudden, this doesn't look like the game of the week. It's still a game I'm looking forward to, but it's not the game of the week. But in general, if I'm looking at the MEAC, it's a very interesting conference. It's a very interesting conference. I think there's a lot of storylines that go on with each team, right? You look at Howard, and I'm like, man, what are you going to be? I look at Norfolk State, and I'm just like, are you ever going to put it together? I look at Delaware State. Hold on, I can't go all around the MEAC. That's tomorrow. That is tomorrow. Remember, we're adding a new weekly programming. Every Wednesday, we're going to go around the HBCU landscape. So we're going to hit every single FCS HBCU on Wednesdays. Wednesday morning, so tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., or whenever it is that you wake up, I want you to tune in to Locked On HBCU. We're going to break down the SWAC West. We're going to break down the SWAC East. We're going to break down the MEAC. We're going to break down the independents. And we're going to do this every single week. It's the only place that you can get 100% of the HBCUs covered in a 30-minute span. Don't miss that this Wednesday and every Wednesday moving forward. That being said, I was about to go on a whole speech about the MEAC, but I was like, you know what? Some of these things I could just leave for tomorrow. Some of these things won't be spoken, but some of them will. And I don't want to handicap myself again like I did last week. I just don't want to do that, because some of these points are good, and I don't want to touch them too early. But anyway, Central versus Howard. The tension involved there is going to make this a must-watch game. I'm still thinking about going out to it. I just really got to try to find the plane ticket and all the things that I got to do involved. I got to take care of my business, but that's not for the show. Then when it comes to South Carolina State versus Central, I really want to see. This is the time for Central to defend their crown. I think that this is going to be the team you have to watch out for. I really do think that these are the 2 top teams in the MEAC, and they're going to be going up against each other in just the second week of play. This is the game where you're like, all right, the loser's like, I just need you to slip up. I just need you to slip up once, and it's the crazy MEAC, so it could happen. But yeah, this is MEAC play starts this week. Neither one of the games that I highlighted are in week 1, but I do have some really good matchups, and we'll talk about that on Thursday because that is when we look at the games of the week that are not our game of the week, and none of the MEAC games will be the game of the week. That honor goes to Florida A&M versus Southern. So anyway, speaking of FAMU, speaking of Southern, both of their matchups greatly shaped how this week's HBCU rankings turned out. So let's look at why they shaped it and then also what they shaped it into as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Roy. Hey, let's recognize our Roy Player of the Week. So far this season, we've pulled over $10,000 to support players on Roy. Micro deposits lead to massive change. And with the Roy app, you can direct your support to the athletes you love, ensuring that all the funds go to the specific player you choose. The best part is if the athlete transfers or doesn't deliver the content, you get your money back. So you're guaranteed to get delivery on your investment. This week, I'm supporting Andrew Jones out of Grambling. I just pitched in $100 and I'd love for you to join me. Even $10 makes a difference. So let's show Andrew Jones some love and keep him connected to Grambling. Remember, pay today, celebrate tomorrow. Your support sets up your team's success. All you have to do is download the Roy app now and join the NIL game with no subscriptions and no fees. And be sure to check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Roy_return on you for more info. Go ahead and download that app today. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On. Who we picking today? We're in the state of Florida. Check out Locked On Jags, right? Shout out brother Wiggins, man. He always talking shop. Say he always welcoming you to the barbershop. I like that. So shout out to them, man. Shout out Wig. That being said, let's get into our rankings. And the reason I chose Jacksonville is because we're talking about the state of Florida. There were two games that had a big impact on the HBCU rankings this week. It was FAMU versus Jackson State, obviously. And then you're looking at Southern versus Alcorn. I think that these are, especially the first one, is pretty self-explanatory on why Jackson State versus FAMU is such an impact. But in case we needed to be informed again, these were the number 1 and number 3 ranked teams in this ranking. I've said that North Carolina Central is the best HBCU for about 2-3 weeks, I would say. But we're going off of somebody else's rankings, and North Carolina Central was actually number 2 in those rankings. FAMU was 1. Jackson State was 3. So when you're looking at this game and why it was so impactful to the rankings, it's because you had the top 2 teams in the SWAC facing off against each other. You had the top two of the top 3 teams in Black college football facing off against each other. You had 2 top 25 teams facing off against each other. And now you have 2 depending on what rankings you look at, but you have 2 HBCUs. FAMU is out. FAMU is not in any top 25 anymore. North Carolina Central is in every one. Then you have Jackson State in the AFCA. So you have them in the coaches poll, but then in stats perform, you have Tennessee State and no Jackson State. So if you're looking at the top 25, you have North Carolina Central at 21 in the AFCA. Then you have them at 20 in the stats perform. Then you have Jackson State at 23 in the AFCA and Tennessee State in the at 25 in the stats perform. That's a lot of numbers I just threw at you, but just understand that top 25 teams in that conversation. I love saying conversation as opposed to a set number, but if you're talking top 25 conversations, it's Jackson State, Tennessee State, North Carolina Central, right? Not in that order because Central's first, but it's those 3 teams. And then I guess you could throw FAMU because they get votes in both of these polls. So it's about 4 teams who are in that conversation, 3 teams who are really actually talking in that conversation. But anyway, Jackson State versus FAMU, they changed things. So it was FAMU, Central, Jackson State. Now it's Central, Jackson State, FAMU in the top 3 rankings. This is no surprise. I know that Central wasn't the one that slayed the beast or anything. I know Jackson State earned that honor, but I'm not surprised. I expected Central to go up to number 1. I expected Jackson State to go to 2. And I was kind of curious on where they would drop FAMU. They put FAMU at 3. And I think that's because South Carolina State played a D2 team. Had they not played Fort Valley State, had they played for example, had they played Tennessee State and beat them, because Howard played Tennessee State and lost, but had excuse me, had South Carolina State played Tennessee State and won, I think you would have seen them at 3. But because the opponent of the week was on a lower subdivision, they stay put at 4. This is your top 5. Central, Jackson State, FAMU, South Carolina State, then Tennessee State. They climb into the top 5 after leaving for a couple of weeks. They were at 6 last week. Now they're at 5. So that FAMU Jackson State game, it changed a lot. But the thing that changed things as well was Southern versus Alcorn. Because guess who the number 5 team was before all of this? It was Alcorn. They lost to Southern. This is a highly impactful game, and I'm probably going to get to that in a second after we talk about the rankings. But Southern is now at 6. Last week, they were at 9. That's the biggest rise of any team in the HBCU polls this week. So Southern versus Alcorn has such a great impact on these rankings because you took Southern from being a fringe top 10 team to being a darn near top 5 team. They go from 9 barely being in that top 10, like, okay, whatever, Southern, to now number 6 is like, oh, okay, Southern, let's look at you a little bit differently. Alcorn doesn't drop far. They go from 5 to 7. They can't be above Southern. By the way, the reasoning for South Carolina State, maybe I was wrong in this, but the reasoning in which Stan Becton says is that the head-to-head win over South Carolina State was the actual deciding factor. Okay, I can give you that. Also, that South Carolina State win looks better and better by the week. I'll say that for FAMU, because when it comes to the Rattlers, I was looking at Norfolk State, whatever. Alabama State with their quarterback situation, I still give it some love for sure. I'm not going to write it off the way I write off of Norfolk State, but I give it some love, but I also have to look at it a little sideways. But I feel like I just didn't reference the South Carolina State game. I kind of feel like that. But that win looks better and better as the week goes on. It's like, okay, you got a quality victory over a quality team. So, but anyway, that being said, it doesn't really matter anymore because they lost to Jackson State. But Southern came out with the victory over Alcorn, and let's put the rankings to a side for a second. The reason that this game was so important is because of the SWAC West, right? And Fred McNair got his revenge. And I don't know who else slighted McNair, but you got to hope that you ain't on Southern's calendar. You got to hope that you ain't on Southern's hit list, because if you slighted Fred McNair, they're going to get you. Right? Like it's one of those things where I used to watch TNA back when TNA was TNA, which was it was wrestling, but there was this wrestler called Samoa Joe, and it was always this thing that said, Joe's gonna kill you. That's what it feels like. If you slighted Fred McNair, that's what they're gonna do. Jack's gonna kill you. I couldn't think of any spooky season reference to get. Maybe a Jason, kill. Right? Like that's what it feels like, because Texas Southern, they slighted McNair. They ain't hiring him as the coach when it felt like everything was leading up to it. They thought they had it in the bag. I thought we had Fred McNair in the bag, but they thought they had the game in the bag. Nah, Southern came up. Texas Southern choked it. Right? And you look at Alcorn, we know the tension there. They go ahead and they just beat them. There was no choking involved. They just beat Alcorn. But this was a very impactful SWAC West game. And this is one thing I will say. I think that Southern has a greater margin for error than the teams in the SWAC East. See, in the SWAC East, we had another number 1 versus number 2 matchup, Jackson State versus FAMU. I don't think Jackson State can lose 2 games, right? But I also don't think they will, but I don't think that they can. I don't even know if they can lose 1. Like in the matchup in the SWAC East, FAMU feels like, oh, we lost that game. It's going to be really tough to bounce back. It's going to be really tough to get that done. But I look at Alcorn, and I don't know if Alcorn feels like it's going to be really tough to bounce back after a loss to Southern. Same thing with Southern. I think Southern can lose a game or 2. I really do. I don't think that the SWAC West is this small margin for error side of the conference. That belongs to the East, where you lose 2 games, you might want to wrap it up. You lose 2 games in the SWAC West, I'm not writing your obituary yet. I may get the pen out. And get ready to write once you hit 3. But 2 losses, I think a 2-loss team could win in the West. It wouldn't shock me at all. If Grambling goes and runs the table, it would not shock me if Grambling was your SWAC West representative in the SWAC championship game. It wouldn't. Okay, so that's the way that I'm kind of looking at it. But Enough of the rankings. This game was big. Southern's on top of the SWAC West. That will be something that we discuss in our Around the HBCU. So you can look forward to that. But I also want to look at Tennessee State because Tennessee State is entering what I like to consider arguably the biggest stretch of football in Eddie George's Tennessee State career. So let's break that down as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. The WNBA finals are over. The Liberty are your champions. Now it's time for the NBA because that tips off tonight. We have our first bit of NBA action. We have the NFL still going. We have the MLB. The World Series is here. You have the Yankees versus the Dodgers. You got New York versus LA. It's coast to coast, and you need to put some money down on it right now. So I'm looking at a $5 bet. If you're new to FanDuel, you get $200 back in bonus bets. Yes. So you win that bet, you get $200 back in bonus bets. You just going to win on top of a win on top of a win. Shout out my boy James for getting in the game because it's about eating the W's on FanDuel. All you have to do is go to FanDuel.com. That is FanDuel.com to make every moment more. As wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day, every day, making it all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. Tennessee State is entering the last stretch of their season, and this is pivotal. Now, I think that this is a pivotal. I don't know if I want to jump off the boat with it, but I think that this is a pivotal stretch for Eddie George, if not the biggest stretch in his Tennessee State coaching career. I genuinely do, because in this last 4 games, he has the ability to break a trend. He has the ability to reshape a narrative. If you want to prove that you are one of the real competitors in the Big South OVC, you have to finish strong. If you want to show that you actually know how to finish strong, you have to do it this year, because if you don't, that'll make 4 consecutive years in which you do not finish the season strong. Some of those, you didn't play well, period. But in the 2 of the 3, you actually had a good record going into the last 4 games and ended with a 1-3 record in that time span. Over the last 4 years, over the last 3 years, Eddie George has ended the last 4 games 1-3 every single year. If you can win 2 out of 2 or 2 out of 4, if you can have a winning record, right? Like, we're talking about something he's never done. Is this a narrative? I don't know. It's a narrative that I'm viewing, but I don't necessarily know if this is something that people are catching on to. I'll say this, though. If Eddie George and Tennessee State go 1-3 in the last 4 games for the 4th consecutive year, this will be a conversation about why they can't get things going at the end of the year. If you don't want to be looked at as a team that has the inability to finish the season, then you have to win at least 2 of your last 4. You can't go in and have a losing record again. I'm really looking for 3 out of the 4. But here goes the other thing, right? Here goes the other thing. Tennessee State is also going into a much tougher conference schedule. You have UT Martin, who's at 2-1. You have Western Illinois, who's at 2-1. You have Gardner-Webb, who is at 1-2, and you have Southeastern Missouri, who is the only team who is undefeated in the conference and the only team who has more victories than you do at 4-0. You're going into a much tougher conference schedule, and you have to prove that you can actually win with some of the tougher teams, because 2 of the teams that you've beaten so far in conference have 0 conference wins. So I'm looking at this tougher schedule as the end of your season in a time when you have to prove you know how to close out seasons and not go 1-3 for the 4th consecutive year. This is a big time for Eddie George. This is a very pivotal last four games of the season. I don't know if it's a narrative, guys, but I have to ask the question. If you repeatedly struggle at the end of the year, how long until it becomes a narrative? Are you like, oh, you just making stuff up? No, I'm bringing numbers to the table. 2021, 1-3. At the time, they were 4-3. So you end that season 5-6. 2022, you weren't that good anyway. You were 3-4 entering that last game or that last 4-game stretch. You ended 1-3. So now you're 4-7. Last year, you were 5-2. You go 1-3 again. You end the season 6-5. Now you're 6-2. Yeah, one game. If you win one game in the stretch, you will have the most wins ever under Eddie George. You win this game right now, you'll have the best winning streak ever under Eddie George, but you have to show this over the next 4 weeks. I may come in and acknowledge that Tennessee State had the best winning record, may have the best winning streak in Eddie George's career if they win this game against UT Martin coming up. I'll acknowledge it, but I'm still looking at Western Illinois. I'm still looking at Gardner-Webb. I'm still looking at Southeastern Missouri. I'm still looking at these games. These are pivotal matchups. These are games that they will define the season. If you want to be a real competitor, you have to knock off some of the better teams. And if you want to show who you are as a team in general, I'm not just talking about in 2024. I'm talking about culture. You have to finish the season strong. That is a requirement. So tomorrow, like I said, we're going all around the HBCU, SWAC East, SWAC West, MEAC, Independence. So we're going to get some love for North Carolina A&C, some love for Hampton, some love for Tennessee State again, right? We're going to do all of these things on tomorrow's episode. It's the first time I've done it. So this is going to be very fun, and I'm excited to see how it turns out and how we orchestrate a 22 team episode. Be there with me. In the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care. Stay blessed. Peace.